So a very good afternoon to everybody and welcome along to our Business Spotlight interviews. My name is Ron Maycock. I'm the owner of Action Coach Castleford and also of Business Performance UK. And I'm delighted to be joined this afternoon by Louis Weir, who is co-founder and director of a business called E4.Zero. Very good afternoon to you, Louis.
How are we doing?
Yeah, very good, very good. So we're going to hear a lot more from Louis in just a few moments. Before we did that, though, really just want to explain the purpose of these interviews. We're surrounded by some amazing businesses in our region. They've each got their own stories, and these interviews help us share their journeys, showcase their achievements, and ultimately maximize their exposure, all in the name of abundance. And we do this for the benefit of businesses right the way across the UK. It's not just a Yorkshire thing, and sometimes we're doing this internationally as well. So without further ado, it takes us straight on. Louis, tell me a little bit more about E4.Zero.
Yeah, so E4.Zero, we are essentially a business that is passionate about helping organizations become sustainable and resilient. And essentially what we are is a collaboration between experts that are experienced in carbon management, environmental management, and energy management to really provide organizations with that clarity and help them sort of pave the way for their net zero journey and help them come up with sort of decarbonization strategies.
Okay, so is this about their current strategies, or is this more looking at what they're going to have to do in the future to meet certain governmental and international targets that we're all working towards?
Yeah, I mean, both to a certain extent. So quite often what we have in the sort of the industry and the landscape at the minute is your real blue chip companies who have got sort of the internal resource to be able to do these plans themselves. So along the journey, they're much further along. As we start trickling down into the smaller organizations and medium organizations without that sort of resource, then potentially the journey starts right at the beginning in terms of, right, what are the fundamentals that we need to get in place that will allow us to start putting some thought into a plan and a strategy. However, we do still get that, right, we've done so much, or we've gone on our journey and we've gone down the path of carbon neutrality and planting trees, but what should we be doing and where should we go from here? So the conversations, depending on the organizations, are exactly both of them things.
So what's the key driver at the moment, if you like, if you had to identify a problem that you're solving, what would you summarize that as across all industries at the moment?
Okay, yeah, so across all industries, to be honest, the biggest challenge is really the complexity of the landscape and the regulation and the policies. And it's something that trips a lot of organizations up. So we get a lot of businesses that are a sort of what we call a morally driven organization, and they're doing lots of great stuff, but they're almost hesitant to showcase that to the world. And you'll have heard of a term called greenwashing. And greenwashing is a term where, you know, certain environmental activities is exploited in their sales and marketing strategies. And basically because of the complexity of the reporting frameworks and the transparency and the disclosure, that often puts off a lot of companies taking that next step in showcasing what they're doing. So really being able to give organizations clarity around, right, what do we need to have in place and how do we avoid reporting transparently is often a big barrier and almost a big sigh of relief for an organization once they've managed to get over that barrier.
So it's giving an external resource of knowledge of what they need to do to either be compliant or to get ahead of the curve for the future. So within that, on top of the knowledge and the information that you're providing to people, what else do you actually provide in terms of the solution?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned in the introduction to E4.Zero in terms of we're almost a collaboration of different experts and experience, and they cover a range from carbon management, environmental management, and energy management. And the reason why we've gone down this path and sort of we've painted this holistic picture is quite often sort of 10 years ago, energy management will be deployed by businesses and people will be looking for an ROI, and it's a cost-saving exercise for energy management. And now that we've transitioned into this journey that everybody has to make, and this transformation to net zero, everything we now do for businesses has that context around net zero. So as well as being able to help organizations get off the mark and put that sort of sustainability framework in place and allow them to transparently report what they're doing, we are also then able to lend ourselves and deploy the rest of our experts and our tools in terms of energy management and environmental management, to basically give them real projects that will have real impact on their carbon emissions and will meet their reduction goals on their way to net zero. So it's about being able to set them up with all the tools they need to report and go along the journey, and then also giving them the projects that they can potentially plan into their CapEx plans in terms of how are they actually going to get there.
And who validates the progress that they're actually making? Is this coming from yourselves? Is this external certification boards? Is this other people coming in and auditing and measuring and going, yes, you're on track, no, you're not?
So again, depending on industries, depending on customers, there are different frameworks that you can use to almost give you that verification. And this is what we tend to do with a lot of the businesses where we start out, in terms of trying to understand what's the driver behind putting this in place and going for net zero. And quite often what we're hearing, particularly in sort of the construction industry and manufacturing industry, it's supply chain pressure. It's being able to keep that place in the supply chain and the resilience behind that. So if we're doing it based on supply chain pressure, often what you'll see is that drip through tendering processes. So when we're talking about tendering processes, then we'd start potentially recommending aligning with things like PAS 2060, which is the carbon neutrality standard. And that would require, it would require auditing, but you could then opt to get third-party auditing, which would be someone coming in and verifying what you've done, the framework and the results that you've made. So depending on the drivers of why you're going down net zero will potentially depend on whether you go down the route of PAS 2060 or putting science-based targets initiatives in, where it's a certifiable framework.
So the interesting thing, as we're sort of going through this, you highlighted that this at the moment is for the genuine sort of SME, medium-sized kind of organizations. What I'm hearing is it's probably lending itself to the mid to upper end of that these are still sizable organizations, but they might be, hovering around the couple 100 million turnover. They might have multi-sites and things like that. So is that currently your customer base, and will smaller entities start to have to be much more aware of this as we move forward, I guess?
Yeah, essentially a large part of our customer base at the minute is heavily in the manufacturing industry. So they're large energy intensive businesses, or businesses that have certain use of chemicals that are highlighted as a significant environmental impact. And it's mainly because of that supply chain pressure in terms of their clients that may be really big blue chip organizations sort of shining the spotlight and being like, right, we need to do something about that. What are you doing? Have you got a plan in place? So our main customer base at the minute, is absolutely that sort of high energy intensive manufacturing business. However, it's only going to drip feed down into smaller organizations and SMEs, and the 2050 target is for everybody and all businesses. So this is part of where we need to potentially become more innovative in terms of how we reach a wider organization, but also how we provide our expertise and our consultancies to SMEs that potentially don't have a lot of money to spend on consultancies or don't have a lot of resource internally to go about this themselves.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. A lot of the small, there could be still a reasonable sized business, in the couple of million turnover kind of ballpark. So we're not talking necessarily even micro businesses at this point, but the concept of them having an energy manager or a department that is dealing with environmental is quite a stretch at the moment for a lot of businesses. They're either in survival mode or growth mode, and things like this are absolutely something that you would outsource. It's not a luxury that you would have, but having access to that expertise in a package whereby, I guess, you're not then picking up the constant overheads of increased headcount on this side, starts to become much more appealing. And I think that's what may be the driver down the line. As you say, it's regulations that apply to everyone. At the moment, it feels still quite a long way off. And there'll be a lot of businesses going, our consumption is not that big, and therefore our carbon footprint isn't that big, but everyone's contributing, in every way. So it is interesting. So, so as an industry then, and as I'll not say as a new solution, because the solution's been around for a while. It's people haven't maybe been as aware of it, if that makes sense. But what are you finding are the top challenges as an industry to get people to embrace this as a fundamental of how they're going to do business sustainably for the future?
Yeah, so when you say as an industry, challenges for the carbon management consultancy industry, or challenges for the general industries that are trying to decarbonize?
I think for the carbon management side of things, is the main challenge acceptance of what you do, or?
Yeah, I mean, there's different levels in sort of the net zero race, and there's, again, it goes back to the drivers. So quite often, and what we've seen a lot for the ISO 14001 framework rollouts that sort of went down a similar path earlier in the day in terms of supply chain rollout and offering in tenders. There's very much sort of a consideration when you go into a business, you look at 14001 as a lead auditor myself, that it's been done as sort of a tick box exercise, and it's been done for compliance. Now, there's a challenge of almost getting businesses to realize when they need to act. So every business knows they need to act, but some businesses might have a different view of how far away 2050 is. So in terms of when they start the ball rolling, that can be a challenge. Another side of this is, how do you fully embrace carbon management and what we're now sort of rolling into in terms of the ESG world, where essentially, you need to embrace sustainability into your business's core vision and core mission. And until it becomes part of the business's core activities, and sustainability is in everything they do, you're never going to reap the benefit of going down that sustainable journey and being able to convert all the effort you put in your sustainability plan into producing more for less, or increasing the level of sales. So an ESG framework and a sustainability plan can absolutely act as a business growth tool, but only until you fully understand and embrace it into the culture of the business, which, don't get me wrong, is a mean feat. Getting businesses to understand that potential exists is difficult.
So are you, or could you be involved with B Corps getting accredited or accredited as B Corp in terms of their sustainable journey? Is that the sort of level that you could go into, where people, this is their entire culture by definition? They're not a compliance-based mindset of do the bare minimum and just keep them at the right side of the law. They're fundamentally saying everything has to be about this infinite business model rather than a finite one, which will run out of time if we carry on going at the rate we're going.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And to be honest, I think that would be one of the things that scares me, in terms of the rate that regulation and policies are going to have to come in and influence change and be that catalyst for getting people moving. I think is a potential real danger for some organizations that decide not to take the leap and not to take that net zero and sustainable planning seriously. The the idea of B Corp is exactly that. Those that are interested in B Corp have probably gone along that journey and understand the real power of ESG and being able to, you know, harness that power in terms of growing their own business. And B Corp, the qualification stages for B Corp essentially is a big list of questions that are around environmental, social, and governance. And it's actually a tool that we do use, particularly in the early days of a morally driven business that wants to know, right, how do we get off the ground and how do we start this? Then questions are actually a good almost gap analysis tool to be like, look, this is potentially what's expected of you if you want to be sort of an industry leader in the sustainability world. Here is potentially the steps and the tools that we need to put in place and the frameworks that we potentially put in place in order for you to answer these questions and actually get to a point where we can make an application for B Corp.
And it's an area of gaps in the knowledge, so they'll know about their offering, they'll know about how that impacts on various things, but the process of delivering said product or service to the market is something that, quite frankly, they will still need the hand holding on. It's not necessarily, other than the ideology of it, isn't something that they know the detail of how to run a business in that way, because there's very few baselines or benchmarks that we can actually reflect back on. You know, it's all new to everyone, so therefore, you know, we're having to pave our own way. So there might be a you know, an interesting part of your journey in terms of working with B Corps and helping them bridge the gap from where they are to where they want to be, so that they can then be certified and then to move forward as this sustainable business model moving forward anyway. So E4.Zero itself, then, what makes it unique? Because there are others out there, but where are your real strengths in terms of a differentiator?
So from the feedback that we've got when we go out and are almost pitching for businesses, one of the key feedbacks that we get is almost the integrity that we have around sticking to the context of the sustainability plan. And that goes for everything that we offer in terms of environmental, energy, and carbon management. So, for instance, we had an inquiry not that long ago about potentially deploying energy audits, and off the back of the energy audits, creating a 5-year carbon management plan or a 5-year carbon reduction plan, which sounds brilliant, but in the context of sort of efficiently using resource and capital, deploying an energy audit and creating a generic 5-year plan instantly says to me that there isn't a framework set up and there isn't a commitment to a long-term net zero journey, and they don't know how long that's going to be. Because being able to deploy an energy audit in the context of net zero and a decarbonisation strategy, that 5-year plan will check, the number will change to whatever net zero target they're being offered, and the outputs from the energy audit will then be fitting to that timeline in terms of when they've committed to net zero. And you can plan in your reduction stages and your near-term and long-term reduction goals against that energy audit. So I guess for E4.Zero, we're really passionate about, we need to use resource effectively, particularly in a landscape where clarity is potentially lacking and the knowledge and expertise is potentially lacking, is take a business's ideas and make sure it's completely efficient with how they're using capital, and make sure it fits an overarching strategy and an overarching goal to get where they need to be.
I guess almost in summary, that you, if I've got this right, you are everything in terms of working with every aspect of controlling their controllables rather than simply offsetting their footprint. There's other ways to offset, but if they're not going to fundamentally change, then they're still going to have to offset more and more and more as we move forward. So that this is about giving people a clear and defined path so that they can reduce rather than just offset. Is that pretty much where you sort of sit?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And just on that, offsetting is necessary. However, the term offsetting has almost been tarnished. And it's been tarnished to a point where I can go into a business now and they may not know about a lot in terms of sustainability planning and net zero, but what they have heard is offsetting is a load of rubbish or not what it's cut out to be. And essentially that's where people have become frightened by this greenwashing term. So offsetting and then carrying on business as usual, as you just alluded to, is not going to work for anyone.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of reaching net zero, you have to be able to demonstrate that you've done absolutely everything possible to reduce your carbon emissions as much as possible before you get to the offsetting stage. But there's still an offsetting stage and it's still important. And potentially businesses can utilize offsetting in the earlier stages to help with certain sustainability goals. However, it's that offsetting and thinking that that's enough is where potentially businesses are falling short. And even still, that's not potentially greenwashing, it's how they then communicate that to the world that might be greenwashing.
Yeah, it's the old adage of, you know, electric cars, less polluting, but what actually is happening in the supply chain, we're not getting the full footprint, are we?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, they're still manufactured, and, you know, concrete's still concrete, and you know, lithium batteries are still lithium batteries, and there's an awful lot of energy and carbon footprint in the processes of making those. The end product is greener.
Yeah,
not necessarily saying that the process of getting there is any cleaner or you know, any better, but
exactly. In that scenario, the fact that the end product is greener is progress. It's starting.
Mm-hmm.
However, what you alluded to in terms of the transparency of what they've said, if they came out and said, right, here's a carbon neutral product or whatever, that's where it falls short. But if you transparently communicate that in your reporting, saying, look, we've made progress with EV cars, this is much greener. However, we've still got this to tackle, this to tackle, this to tackle, and this is what we're going to be doing about it. That would be the way to transparently go about reporting it.
So as almost like a final question then, so in terms of what's next for you, if you could define the perfect scenario of a business that would need the support and inputs of E4.Zero, what would that look like?
I'll give you two answers because there's two things that I'm really wanting to achieve over the next couple of years, and so one of them is our sort of almost perfect solution and where we go from here in terms of we want to engage with as many energy intensive businesses as possible, because with the energy intensive businesses there is more scope to make significant carbon impacts. And particularly what we're looking for energy intensive businesses, other than them being energy intensive, is really the psychographic of their business leaders, i.e., are they ready to embrace sustainability and ESG into their core business? And are they ready to make that monumental culture change internally and fully embrace this into their business activities? So it's very hard in terms of our marketing plan because we have to go off psychographic of business leaders rather than types of businesses. However, the other flip side of that is, again, I think I've mentioned it more along the SME lines, is there's a lot of grant funding out there for smaller businesses, but it's particularly aimed at carbon saving projects and reductions. However, there's not a lot of support out there for businesses that need to understand that fundamental level of how do we set up being able to disclose our carbon emissions and move forward from there. So one of the big things that I want to tackle over the next sort of one year is setting up webinars where we can invite along a lot of these SME businesses to learn about how do we start a net zero journey. This might be what we're doing at the minute, but how do we go back to that core fundamentals in terms of setting up that reporting framework and being able to transparently disclose to our supply chain our carbon emissions? Because at the stage in terms of a macroeconomic view, in terms of what every business has to do, just being able to disclose your carbon emissions to your supply chain is probably far in front of a lot of what businesses can do at the minute. And that's the first stage that really needs to be tackled.
Mm-hmm. And it's that old adage, if you can't measure it, you can't report it. If you can't report it, you can't manage it. And if you can't manage it, you can't improve it. And we are right at the start of that journey. People don't even know how to report this.
Yeah.
and that's a fundamental issue. We're being told we need to change. We don't even know what our baseline is, because no one's figured out, or no one's made it knowledgeable or free access to that knowledge of, this is actually how you define your baseline. What's your starting point? Then we can see where you're trying to get to. Then we can actually hold your hand and show you a way. I think the webinars, the educational side of things, will be a great lead into then ongoing. If you want to do it on your own, more than welcome to. If you want us to hold your hand through the process, even better. We'll be delighted to take you on that journey. And I think that will cement the business offering into the future, or give it that longevity and a real purpose within that supply chain of improvement. So no, that's great. So it's bringing us towards the end of the interview then. Is there any areas that we've not covered, or have we pretty much started the road to, I don't know, righting all the wrongs and putting the world to right?
I think so. I mean, I try and remain completely optimistic about it. I'm going with the the opinion that we will do it, and we will rewrite the legacy of the world and improve the lives of future generations. So I always sort of remain optimistic and positive about it. And I think the fact that we're sort of a young organization that is heavily involved in this sustainability sector, that's going to change massively over the next 10-15 years, is in a really exciting journey. And I'm hoping that we'll have and pick up a lot of clients along the way and take them on that journey, and it'll also be an exciting journey for them as well.
And as you've just alluded to there, and this is a start of a journey for everyone. People have been talking about it, and by the sound of it now, there's people who will actually say, great, one thing to talk about it, there's another thing to define a path, and we can show you what that path actually is. You then choose to walk the path, even better. If you don't, then you probably need to just make sure you're on the right side of compliance, and just keep being motivated for those reasons, just to keep going rather than for doing the right thing. But as you say, it's a rapidly changing market, and over the next 10 or 15 years, the world of business is going to look very different in terms of carbon footprints. Certainly in the UK and across Europe, maybe not so much in two other superpowers in terms of industry, but we can but try and get them onto the same page at least. So no, that's really insightful. So that does bring us to the end of the interview, and really would just like to thank Louis for sharing some of his insights. It's a fascinating market. I say it's changing every day, and will continue to do so. If you're in business, have a chat with E4.Zero, and just make sure that you at least know what your starting point is, and you're speaking to some experts who can show you what needs to be done in your business to get ahead of this curve and do your bit for saving the planet and making it more sustainable. So thank you for sharing, Louis. If you're watching this, if you're wanting to record your own, if you want to shine the spotlight on yourselves, showcase your business, showcase your journey, just get in touch. When we post these videos, we'll put all the links on so you can see the full interviews, and likewise, if you're interested in doing this for yourself, all the instructions of how to book in and how to get in touch will be on those videos. So just remains to thank again Louis for joining us this afternoon. So thank you, Louis.
Yeah, no, thank you for the opportunity.
And thank you for everyone for watching another of our Business Spotlight interviews. I've been Ron Maycock. We'll see you soon. Take care.